From the Department of Communications at the University of Bath comes an article from November 30th, 2023. Optimistic thinking linked with lower cognitive abilities. New research. The subhead: Study flags negative implications for financial well-being. The article points to a peer-reviewed paper in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, written by Professor Chris Dawson. Dawson is a professor in the university's School of Management. The article from the Department of Communications begins with, quote, "Optimistic thinking has long been immortalized in self-help books as the key to happiness, good health, and longevity, but it can also lead to poor decision-making, with particularly serious implications for people's financial well-being." End quote. Information from the following paragraph comes as no surprise. Quote, "Excessive optimism is actually associated with lower cognitive skills, such as verbal fluency, fluid reasoning, numerical reasoning, and memory, whereas those high on cognitive ability tend to be both more realistic and pessimistic in their expectations about the future." End quote. The article continues with a quote from Professor Chris Dawson. Quote, "Forecasting the future with accuracy is difficult, and for that reason we might expect those with low cognitive ability to make more errors in judgment, both pessimistic and optimistic. But the results are clear. Low cognitive ability leads to more self-flattering biases, people essentially deluding themselves to a degree." End quote. Dawson goes on, quote, "This points to the idea that whilst humans may be primed by evolution to expect the best, those high on cognitive ability are more able to override this automatic response when it comes to important decisions. Plans based on overly optimistic beliefs make for poor decisions and are bound to deliver worse outcomes than would realistic beliefs. Unrealistically optimistic financial expectations can lead to excessive levels of consumption and debt, as well as insufficient savings. It can also lead to excessive business entries and subsequent failures. The chances of starting a successful business are tiny, but optimists always think they have a shot and will start businesses destined to fail." The problem with our being programmed to think positively is that it can adversely affect our quality of decision-making, particularly when we have to make serious decisions. We need to be able to override that, and this research shows that people with high cognitive ability manage this better than those with low cognitive ability. Unrealistic optimism is one of the most pervasive human traits, and research has shown people consistently underestimate the negative and accentuate the positive. The concept of positive thinking is almost unquestionably embedded in our culture, and it would be healthy to revisit that belief." End quote. The peer-reviewed paper was published November 10th, 2023, and titled "Looking at the Bright Side of Life, Cognitive Ability and Miscalibrated Financial Expectations." The B in bright is bracketed by parentheses. The abstract of the peer-reviewed paper begins with a sentence about optimism that can reasonably be applied to our collective response to climate change. Quote, "It is a puzzle why humans tend toward unrealistic optimism, as it can lead to excessively risky behavior and a failure to take precautionary action." End quote. The peer-reviewed paper sampled considerably more than 36,000 individuals from the UK. The primary finding outlined in the peer-reviewed paper includes a negative relationship between cognitive ability and optimism. The abstract states the bottom line. Quote, "This suggests that the negative consequences of an excessively optimistic mindset may, in part, be a side product of the true driver, low cognitive ability." End quote. 4 paragraphs into the introduction, the peer-reviewed paper points out that more than 1,000 peer-reviewed papers have been published on the topic of unrealistic optimism during the last 4 decades. However, there has been no test of the relationship between optimism, including unrealistic optimism, and cognitive ability. The peer-reviewed paper concludes with a set of conclusions supported by the current paper and also by additional peer-reviewed literature. These conclusions are twofold. 1. Unrealistically optimistic financial expectations can lead to excessive levels of current consumption and debt, as well as insufficient savings. And 2, unrealistically optimistic financial expectations can also lead to excessive business entries and subsequent failures, as optimists overestimate the financial returns from entrepreneurship. The author concludes that these consequences of optimism bias might be a side product of the true driver, low cognitive ability, or, in this case, cognitive inability. Similarly, unrealistic optimism may mediate the important relationship between cognitive ability and financial vulnerability. While unrealistic optimism about household finances is a very specific measure of optimism, if unrealistic optimism can be applied to other arenas, cognitive ability could also explain why optimists fail to take precautionary actions outside the realm of finance, such as quitting smoking. Again, the author could have included any number of other actions about which humans fail to take precautionary measures, including stopping drinking alcohol, abandoning gambling, halting habitat destruction, and addressing climate change.